Otherwise it might cut off some of the text. Anyway, tēnā koutou katoa, ko tēnei te mihi ki e koutou kua tai mai nei tēnei rā, ko tēnei te mihi ki te tangata whenua o ngā motu, ko Avril ahau, he Pākehā ahau no kaitaia. Kia ora koutou katoa, nā mai haere mai ki tēnei hōtaka. I really want to make a special welcome to Rosie, who is new to our sociological community this year, and as a master's student is presenting on her master's research following me today. And I want to thank everybody for coming, and particularly to Callum for all the kind of behind the scenes tech work that makes it possible for us to do this and to do just about everything as an organisation, I have to say. And also to you, Stella, for all your work for the organisation, but today particularly for your role in chairing this. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Okay, so some of you will be aware that this session attracted a degree of negative comment on Twitter, which, as far as I can understand it, comes down to a rejection of the appropriateness of white women talking about decolonisation, maybe at all, I'm not sure, or at least without being in dialogue with Māori scholars or Indigenous scholars. And that question of dialogue is a really massive one that we can't really address adequately in this session. And, you know, the whole particular situation of this particular session, I don't want to waste time kind of going into, but we certainly, I just wanted to say that we are interested and open to dialogue with colleagues who are interested in that. The concern was also raised on Twitter that Indigenous people and knowledge need to be centred in decolonial work, a point with which I absolutely agree, and that is a great starting point, in fact, for my presentation, which is very much focused on the experiences of white/settler academics learning to de-centre themselves and their, you know, settled normal ways of doing academic life in support of Indigenous efforts towards decolonising the academy. So the idea of decolonising the academy is a huge idea, right? A massive project that would require incredible amount of structural change and definitely Indigenous leadership. So the focus of this presentation is on a much more small micro issue, I guess, of the contributions that settler scholars can make now in their daily work, focusing in particular on how we or they engage with Māori colleagues and communities and with Mātauranga Māori. So really kind of honing in on that bold, italicised bit of the quote there from Linda Tuamai-Smith, which was one of the, you know, from an interview that she had with the radio, and amongst the kind of recent public debate about systemic racism at Waikato, which of course, as we know, is not something that's unique to Waikato. So the point being that the focus, the sort of the central focus of this presentation is around Mātauranga Māori. And there's a lot of talk, it was partly driven by the fact that there's a lot going on around Mātauranga Māori in our universities these days. We have vision Mātauranga components of every research funding application we do. There's lots of stuff around Mātauranga and Māori in ethics and so on. All the major research funders like MBIE and the Royal Society have expectations that this is something we've given thought to and that we are engaging with as much as possible. And I think there is a degree of cynicism, and we are probably right to be somewhat cynical or cautious or wary of the way that the institutions are engaging with Mātauranga, how much of it's driven by money, what is the knowledge base of the people who are driving these things, and how do they, you know, how thoroughgoing, like going back to Linda's quote there about things being very much on the surface and not really being thoroughgoing kind of changes as yet in the universities. But, so we may well be cynical and concerned, but at the same time, many senior Māori scholars are engaged in this kind of work as well, and in pushing this opportunity, this moment, to maximise the chance to transform our universities in decolonising directions. And so in this presentation, I'm just drawing on data from interviews with just 4 Pākehā scholars, focusing on some of the really interesting things that they had to say on the basis of their experience of working with Māori colleagues and communities and with Mātauranga within their academic work and disciplines. And I wanted to start with this quote from Boaventura de Sousa Santos. I need to fix up my own screen if I can work out how to do that. Sorry. Because I think this is kind of quite a lovely, this idea of abyssal thinking is quite a tidy little useful concept for explaining the problem of the universities as far as Indigenous knowledge is concerned. Modern Western thinking is an abyssal thinking. It consists of a system of visible and invisible distinctions. The invisible distinctions divide social reality into 2 realms, such that the other side of the line vanishes as reality, becomes non-existent, and is indeed produced as non-existent. Non-existent means not existing in any relevant or comprehensible way of being. What most fundamentally characterises abyssal thinking is thus the impossibility of the co-presence of the 2 sides of the line. So, you know, if you think about the way that Māori knowledge and many other knowledge traditions from other, you know, non-white, non-Western cultures have been treated by, within academic thought, if you like, they are often either completely excluded or reduced to the status of myth or tradition and so on. And as Māori scholar Garrett Cooper makes a similar point when he talks about Māori knowledge being cast into an epistemic wilderness, with Māori being regarded as producers of culture rather than knowledge. So that's the kind of, you know, familiar institutional knowledge relations that we've all been kind of educated within as in our university careers, with the university as a perpetrator of various forms of epistemic violence against Indigenous thought and knowledge. So, and against that, I drew on my title on this idea of a bridge, which is an idea, a metaphor that I was introduced to by Andrew Judd in an interview with him. Why is sorry everybody, my slides were not moving for me. So this is a little extract from my interview with Andrew Judd. He's talking about Kaumātua. I had told him about this. I had said this to him. Imagine a river and there's 2 sides to the river, 2 banks, and you've got Pākehā on one side and Māori on the other. The treaty is the bridge. We'll come all the way over to here and you never come over to our side. So what if the university was also a bridge? Traditionally, universities have operated on the assumption that there is only an unbounded ocean of Western universal knowledge, unaware that there is another shore or a series of other shores, let alone the possibility of a bridge between worlds, between knowledges, or of a relationship of co-presence or coexistence between them. So our universities are now at least turning towards and acknowledging the existence of another shore, opening themselves to an understanding of the existence of a river, that they are on a river rather than an ocean or an abyss between worlds, and a river, of course, that is bridgeable. Can they go further and step out onto that bridge, transform themselves into a bridge? This is the kind of questions that we, it's among the many that we are grappling with in the universities these days. So against the epistemic violence of abyssal thinking, the current inclusion of Mātauranga Māori is potentially transformational, but there are also dangers of bringing Mātauranga into the academy. As Linda Smith and her colleagues point to some of those dangers here, where they talk about the problem of Mātauranga or other forms of Indigenous knowledge being made to fit existing academic regimes of control. And one of our participants, Justine, said institutions are consumptive, things shapeshift. You try and teach something based on Mātauranga Māori and then next minute it becomes transactional. People are using it and saying it without in any way being confused by it. So I think these are both kind of useful warnings that any decolonising relationship towards Mātauranga in the academy has to be one that comes with changes to academic regimes, and it cannot and should not be too easy. It shouldn't be an easy fit or an easy process. And just before I go any further, I'll just make the point that participant quotes are italicized in my slides, and And also some of them have chosen to have pseudonyms and some of them haven't, but I'm not going into which is which. So if we were talking about transforming the university into a bridge of some kind of decolonising idea, as I've already noted, the first and most important thing would be Māori leadership of what that might mean, and there would have to be massive structural change. But it's definitely my position that there is role to be played, or a number of roles to be played by those of us who are not Māori in contributing to that kind of a project. And what I want to focus on in the rest of the talk, which is quotes from participants, is the piece that I've highlighted in the slide on purple. Some of the kind of aspects about stepping out onto the bridge, working with Māori colleagues, communities, students, and working with Mātauranga Māori. And I put this lovely quote from one of our participants, Tim, on this slide as well, because it so nicely encapsulates the various different kinds of strands of allied work in this area. We have to make space as well as transform ourselves and do things differently and develop good relationships and be honourable. So making space and getting out of the way of Indigenous leadership and vision, while at the same time working to establish and maintain good and honourable relationships with Indigenous leaders, colleagues, research partners, communities, engaging in processes of reflection and self-transformation, learning about the existence of that other shore and of the contours and edges of our own as a practice of getting ready to engage with Te Ao Māori, and also practice, right? We have to be doing something, making a contribution, doing something differently from the ways we've been taught and become habituated to doing. So starting with that issue of building relationships with Māori colleagues or mentors, that was a hugely important issue that each of the people that I spoke to talked about. Heather said, I think you have to spend time in Māori spaces so that you're comfortable and can navigate those safely and make friends with folk, make buddies, and those buddies will serve you well. It's very rewarding, but it's a lifelong gig. You need a village behind you to do this mahi. You can take from the village when you need, but you also have to give back to the village. It's not a solo practitioner's business. If you're being a solo practitioner, you're probably not doing it right. Heather talked about an apprenticeship model for getting into this kind of work, I guess, and for the need to have someone that you can turn to when you make mistakes or to and to ask for advice. And as she says, it's a long-term commitment and work best done collectively, not as an individual effort. But building the necessary relationships is not always easy and straightforward, as the next quote from Amelia suggests. So Amelia, like probably a lot of people really, became aware of Te Ao Māori in her doctoral research and sought advice from a Māori academic at her institution. And she said, I got quite a sharp response back. That was probably the first instance I can think of that anxiety of working with Māori and engaging in that space and the fear and discomfort. I was expecting a degree of advice, probably not aware at the time of the context that she would have been getting requests like that all the time from many, many Pākehā students who had no idea what the heck they were doing. When I look back now, I was just reproducing that labour, that expectation that's placed on Māori colleagues to be the experts in all of that and do the hand-holding, because students and staff are not confident, capable, competent in that space. I guess that's how I think back on it, that would have probably come from all those frustrations that I see with my colleagues now being in a different position. And I wanted to juxtapose this quote with Heather's, as Amelia started off as, in Heather's terms, a solo practitioner as a PhD student, but she has since forged really strong relationships with Māori colleagues and works with them. But this is important, I think, as a reminder to us that we don't all begin in the same place, and we come to our relationships with Māori and Te Ao Māori via different routes, and also that people will make mistakes and experience difficulties along the way. And also it's important to note her awareness of the huge expectations that are put on Māori academics, and that was a point that was also made by other people that I spoke to. So the rest of the slides from here kind of move more into the relationship between these Pākehā academics and Mātauranga, although of course that's not divorced from the relationships with Māori people as well. A long quote from Tim. Whoops, gone too far. Talking here about, as a co-author, I guess, or maybe a supervisor also of Māori students, I find myself reverting to my disciplinary lens, my radical philosophy of science foundation standpoints. There's a real tendency for that to intrude and for those kinds of philosophical conceptual frameworks to disrupt what are really important moments in Māori theorising and understanding. I have to name that and think of that as a deficit in my own space because I can't actually adequately experientially make that connection. I can intellectually, no trouble, but I can't experientially make that connection. That means I often find myself in a space where I know I can't make a useful contribution. And so I might have questions, the red pen might be itching, but I've got to leave it. I think, this idea, Tim really kind of beautifully expresses the sense of the struggle involved in not repeating epistemic violence in his engagement with Māori scholarship, how hard it is to resist his own disciplinary learning and modes, how his red pen is itching, but he keeps it off the paper, the kind of work that's required to decenter Western knowledge. And I really like the way also here that he distinguishes between cognitive and experiential knowledge. He was talking about Wairoa at this point in our conversation, and he said that cognitively he can get Wairoa, but not experientially. So if I go back to the bridge metaphor, he can step out onto the bridge, he can see the other shore, but in this case, he can't actually step off the other side onto Te Ao Māori and to experience it from within. Another long quote from Amelia again on a different kind of issue around Mātauranga, using Mātauranga Māori in her own work. I wrote this paper that was about critiquing the whole more than human theoretical turn and that colonising approach where these theorists lay claim to something new, and meanwhile there were Indigenous theorists saying this stuff for ages, and you guys are just not engaging with their work. So the paper I wrote was fleshing that out a bit and saying, there is all this theory within Māori communities. I was trying to do it from the place of arguing for decolonisation of the discipline and not trying to fit Māori perspectives within this other theory. But I just have discomfort about writing about some of that stuff myself. I went through processes of chatting to another person from iwi, one of the iwi that she has relations with, about what I was writing. And he added something, said, make sure you say that these are rooted within a Māori worldview. I had chats about it, but still I'm just, should I have written that paper? I don't know. So this is a kind of really important and tricky kind of difficulty also, I think. Should we as non-Indigenous scholars make use of or engage with Mātauranga Māori in our own research work? And so here Amelia's expressing her own discomfort with the paper where she did do precisely that, despite her good intentions and despite the fact that she conferred with a Māori mentor and had their support for what she was doing. She's still not sure whether she should have written it, which I think is probably a discomfort that ultimately stems from the awareness that it ends up with a publication that counts towards her own individual career advancement, and maybe also the sense that it's not particularly or at all contributing to furthering specific Māori interests. I have one more long quote, which is again from Tim, and I've chosen this one as an expression of a number of important things about engaging in work with and for Māori communities. Tim again is talking about a particular kind of relationship with one community. He said that was the beginning of a relationship that lay fallow for probably 5 years. And then a person who had been part of the group contacted me completely independently about the possibility of developing some research capability for the trust that operates for that hapu. So that built from there. And although the project was nominally about rongoa, it has actually opened out into a whole set of concerns about how to work with a fragmented and partial treaty settlement they've got, to orient to and begin to address some of the concerns that were expressed at that initial meeting. But it's a big passage of time. This is a relationship starting, and then we were not useful or necessary for some time. And then it came to a point where they were wanting to build research capability. They drew on our expertise to help design a project with MBIE and got 2 years worth of funding to grow some community researchers in the rongoa space, who immediately made connections into the environmental, conservation, sustainability space. It built from there. So there's a couple of things, 2 or 3 things I want to highlight around this story. One is the importance of slowness. And some of you may be aware of the literature around slow academia, slow scholarship. this is a relationship that fell over 5 years, as Tim says, which is a great example of the importance of enduring long-term relationships, not just in and out for the term of one planned project. And which means having enough time and capacity to take care of relationships and to respond when the call comes. So, things that we're all aware are not that easy to manage within the kinds of university environments that we work in. A second point that I want to particularly highlight relates to Tim's final point about how the kind of research and interest in traditional rongoa and environmental sustainability came together at this point, and also got MBIE funding. So you can sort of see immediately already, I suppose, something about Mātauranga and Western science being used together, which fits with another of De Souza Santos's handy concepts about an ecology of knowledge approach as a way to overcome the abyssal thinking of the West. At its most basic, and I think actually I found this lovely image in a paper that's just come out in a recent Royal Society journal. Why won't you go? Sorry, I'm having trouble with my slides. There we go. Of this, this is a lovely kind of, and it's also a river again, which is fantastic. Idea about combining, this is from Māori scholars, about how to work with Mātauranga Māori and Western science together, which I think is very much akin to De Souza Santos's ecology of knowledge approach. So the idea being that you keep the distinction between these two bodies of knowledge and you bring them together in a kind of pragmatic way, concepts and processes of whatever each side, as appropriate to fit to the kaupapa, basically, of the research with whatever it is that's required to do the job. And this is also like an approach to avoid that sort of domestication, appropriation of Indigenous knowledge and having that subsumed within a Western framework. The third point I wanted to note about Tim's quote is that community leadership and initiative drove the research, right? The community came to the academics, researchers for their support for a project that they wanted to undertake, not the other way around. And linking back to De Santos, he acknowledges that the relations between different knowledges are haunted by an asymmetry that comes out of the sedimented history and practice of Western abyssal thinking and domination, which makes a genuine ecology of knowledge practice difficult. So where you can have Indigenous leadership, that obviously really helps in kind of correcting that asymmetry. Stella, I suspect I'm gone way over time, have I?
You've gone a little bit over time, but not way over time.
I really have nothing else to say other than just to kind of, just go boom, boom, boom. These things are the things that it all comes down to that I've tried to cover, but I think we just might leave it there in the interest of having some time for questions.
Okay, so that's great. Thanks very much for that, Avril. That was a really informative presentation. I really enjoyed that. Can you all join with me and give Avril a little questions? Does anybody have any questions or comments or discussions that they would like to engage with Avril?
Sorry, it was such a gallop. Oh.
It's not a question, Avril, it's more of an observation. As a lot of you are aware, I'm at a high school, and I would certainly agree that the Maori teachers at our school are seen as the experts, and we've got 200 staff, and their workload is insane because everybody is always consulting them, and it's actually So I just found that very interesting, that as I would expect, it's exactly the same at university level, but I'm not quite sure. When you was talking about that, I was thinking, but ideally would be hiring more staff, but they're just not there at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was just something it was great. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah?
I've muted. Sarah.
Sarah. You know, and some of the participants had really good, interesting things to say about that too, in terms of it's not just the expectations put on Māori academics within the university, but they're also their expectations of their own communities outside of the university. And then also the fact that often they're not mana whenua in the area that they're working in, and there's sort of complexities and difficulties that come out of that, that often most of us who are not Māori are not even aware of, you know. So yeah, it can be massive.
Hi, Avril.
Oh no, sorry, go ahead to the back.
Oh, sorry. Hi, thank you. I'm glad. I think Sarah brought up the high school, because I had a question and didn't want to bring the high school because you were talking about academia, but I was just I'm a high school teacher, or I'm not teaching now. And I was talking to my friend who's teaching at a high school in Dargaville, and yesterday for a couple of hours, and she was telling me, and I didn't catch the beginning of your presentation, but I think I caught something about cynicism and how there's some kind of nod or lip service given to all things Maori when it comes to education, but then the cynicism might come from like initiatives that are put in place that are not fully supported by infrastructure that surrounds it. And she was just telling me that there's a thing called Ngāuri Atane that's being implemented at the high school. And so there's a lady, presumably coming from the ministry, who's come to the high school from I'm not quite sure where, and she's removed students from their classes from year 9 to 13. And presumably what she's doing is teaching them, you know, Maori knowledges using Maori, I guess, ways of educating. And there's a lot of ambivalence that's going around as to how effective that can be, and how and nobody could answer questions as to what she's really trying to accomplish and how useful it is going to be for those students who have been pulled effectively out of their classes and not gaining any credits and not getting any kind of revision. I mean, how can that be possibly helpful for them? And I think the cynicism might come from things that are implemented in that way, like kind of in a rush and not fully supported, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a situation I would absolutely not want to comment on that situation, not knowing anything about it. But certainly within the universities, I mean, you know, it's one of those tricky things because you have to start somewhere, and but the point really, I think we do have to be wary of some of the things that are done, and the rationales maybe behind it, but we also have to, well, we Māori in particular, right, but other people in support, try to make the most of it, most of the opportunities to push for progressive kinds of change. I could think of a number of reasons, but I don't think we better.
Thank you.
Avril, I have it's not really a question for you. I'd just be interested to hear your thoughts on this. At one point, I think it was a quote from Tim where he was talking about forgetting his own disciplinary, lens when he was working in the space. And you know, obviously it's a really difficult thing for Pākehā academics to, you know, we're in a system that's really embedded in sort of, you know, Western epistemologies and values, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm just sort of wondering what that might look like for Pākehā academics to go through the mahi of learning how to forget.
Yeah, I don't think he said forgetting, but holding back. You know, I don't know, maybe he did say forget, but he certainly was describing a kind of conscious decision to not
stepping away from.
Yeah, to not engage in the way that he would if he was just letting rip from his kind of academic disciplinary background, you know, because in support of a kind of budding, I mean, he works within a Māori research team. He may be the only Pākehā on that team, but he's certainly a minority. So he's in a you know, a particular situation as well. And I guess one of the kaupapa of that team is building Māori researchers, you know, and Māori knowledge within an academic kind of mode. So it's a delicate balance, yeah. And I mean, it must be a constant, you know, it's a constant judgment call from paragraph to paragraph, I imagine, when you're reading where you draw the line about what you comment on or want to have different, or what you let go and let it develop into its own thing. Yeah. Probably a little bit like that, you know, that braided rivery thing in a way, but also different. And he's kind of having that struggle inside his own head when he's reading students' work or whatever, as opposed to being in a team where you're all kind of chewing the fat together and figuring out what to do.
Yeah, it's a difficult space for people to sort of negotiate, isn't it? Are there any other questions or comments for Avril?